When the showroom manager looked down on a farmer, and the unexpected twist. The luxury car showroom gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off pristine glass walls. Exquisite supercars stood proudly on display, not just as vehicles but as masterpieces, symbols of status and power. This was more than just a place to buy cars. It was an exclusive domain where only the right kind of people were truly welcomed. The heavy glass door trembled slightly as a man stepped inside. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted, conversations quieted, a few employees stole quick glances before turning away, faint smirks playing on their lips. Daniel stood firm, unfazed by the judgmental stares. His boots were still dusted with earth from a long day's work. His faded flannel shirt, worn-out jeans, and calloused hands marked him as an outsider in this world of polished elegance. Nearby, a couple examining a sleek silver sports car exchanged hushed whispers. A young salesman hesitated, briefly considering approaching Daniel before deciding otherwise and returning to his work. But not everyone ignored him. At the reception desk, Ethan, the showroom manager, was engaged in conversation with another employee. But as soon as he spotted Daniel, his demeanor shifted. The smug smile disappeared, replaced by a look of thinly veiled irritation. Straightening his tie, Ethan strode toward Daniel as if confronting an uninvited guest. Daniel had barely taken another step before Ethan blocked his way. "Good afternoon," Ethan greeted him, polite but cold. "How can I assist you?" Daniel slowly lifted his gaze. Calm yet piercing. He had encountered plenty of people like Ethan in his life. Those who judged others based solely on appearances. But today, he had no intention of walking away so easily. Daniel remained still, utterly unfazed by Ethan's scrutinizing gaze. He had encountered far too many people like him, those who believed a person's worth was measured by expensive suits or the car they drove. But instead of arguing or justifying himself, Daniel simply glanced around the showroom, his expression calm and unbothered. "I heard you have the newest model here. I'd like to take a look," Daniel said slowly. Ethan smirked, his eyes gleaming with mockery. He gave Daniel's worn-out work clothes a once-over before shaking his head dismissively. "Sir, our showroom is reserved for serious buyers. If you're looking for something within your budget, I'd be happy to direct you to the used car dealership across town." His words were nothing short of a slap in the face. A few employees stole uneasy glances at each other, but no one dared to interfere. Some customers took notice of the exchange, yet they merely observed in silence. Unwilling to get involved, Daniel let out a small smile, his expression unchanged. Slowly, he removed his old baseball cap, dusted it off against his palm, and looked straight at Ethan. "Do you really think money always comes dressed in designer suits?" Ethan crossed his arms, his smirk deepening. He didn't need to answer, his posture said it all. In his eyes, Daniel didn't look like someone who belonged in this showroom. And that was enough reason to dismiss him. Daniel sighed, not in anger, but in quiet understanding. He had seen this kind of judgment countless times before. He had been met with the same condescending looks at luxury restaurants, exclusive boutiques, and now, here, in this high-end car showroom. But today, Daniel had no intention of letting things end so easily. Just then, the glass doors of the showroom swung open once more. A gust of cool air swept in, accompanied by the sound of purposeful footsteps. A man entered, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. A luxury watch gleamed under the showroom's bright lights, and he carried himself with an effortless confidence, one that naturally commanded attention. Ethan was too preoccupied with Daniel, still trying to find a polite way to send him off, and didn't immediately register the newcomer. But then, a deep, steady voice shattered the tense atmosphere. "Dad, I'm sorry I'm late." Silence fell over the showroom. Employees turned their heads. A few customers held their breath, watching the scene unfold. Ethan slowly turned around, his face draining of color the moment his eyes landed on the man who had just entered. Standing before him was Elijah Carter, a well-known businessman and a high-profile client of the showroom. But more importantly, he was Daniel's son. The showroom was engulfed in silence. Salespeople and customers alike turned their attention to the man who had just entered. Elijah Carter, a name well known in the business world, the owner of a massive corporation, a man with an impressive fortune. His perfectly tailored navy blue suit and luxury watch gleamed under the bright showroom lights. Not only was he a successful entrepreneur, but he was also one of the showroom's most valuable clients. Ethan swallowed hard, his expression frozen. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. Elijah called Daniel Dad. Elijah strode forward, his once present smile fading as his gaze landed on Ethan. Then shifted to Daniel. Dad, what's going on? His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable sharpness beneath the surface. Daniel remained composed, adjusting the old baseball cap in his hands before replying in a quiet, measured tone. Oh, nothing much, son. The manager here just didn't think I was qualified to browse the cars in this showroom. Elijah blinked once, then turned sharply to Ethan. Is that so? His voice was lower now. Deliberate, dangerous. Ethan immediately shook his head, forcing an awkward smile. Mr. Carter, I had no idea this was your father. Elijah tilted his head slightly, his expression amused yet laced with menace. Oh, so if he wasn't my father, you still would have kicked him out, wouldn't you? Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. The employees nearby shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact, while the customers who had been watching now fully grasped what was happening. Some whispered among themselves, while others simply observed, waiting to see how things would unfold. Ethan swallowed hard, desperately trying to salvage the situation. No, that's not what I meant. I just didn't recognize him at first. It was a misunderstanding. Really? Elijah crossed his arms, his smirk growing colder. A misunderstanding, huh? Let me see if I understand correctly. A man walks into your showroom, not dressed like the wealthy customers you're used to. And instead of treating him like a legitimate client, you judge him by his appearance and immediately suggest he go to a used car dealership instead. That's how you do business? Ethan opened his mouth to respond but quickly realized he had no defense. Beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. The silence in the showroom became suffocating. Other employees remained frozen, unwilling to get involved. They all knew Ethan had a habit of profiling customers, but this time, he had made a fatal mistake. Elijah waited for an answer, but when Ethan stood there speechless, he let out a quiet chuckle. Yeah, that's what I thought. Turning to Daniel, his voice softened. Dad, do you still want to look at the cars? Daniel glanced at his son, then at the showroom around him. He had considered walking away the moment he was disrespected, but now, there was no need. He shook his head, smiling slightly. No, son, I think I'd rather buy a car from a place that knows how to respect its customers. Elijah nodded without hesitation. That sounds like a great idea. And with that, the two turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the showroom in absolute silence. But the story wasn't over yet. Because as they stepped out the door, Ethan suddenly realized his real nightmare was only just beginning. Ethan stood frozen, his face drained of color as he watched Elijah and Daniel walk away. It felt like a massive weight had settled on his chest. This can't end like this. Elijah Carter wasn't just a wealthy customer. He was an influential figure in the business world. Losing his business wasn't just a missed sale, it could seriously damage the showroom's reputation. And all of this, because of Ethan's own short-sightedness. I can't let this happen. Mr. Carter, please wait a moment, Ethan called out, rushing after them. His voice no longer carried its usual arrogance or condescension, only pure desperation. Elijah halted just before stepping outside and slowly turned. His gaze was icy. Something you need? Ethan forced an uneasy smile, trying to regain some semblance of professionalism. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Honestly, I never meant to offend your father. If I had known. Elijah raised a hand, cutting him off. And what would you have done? Treated him better just because you knew he was my father? Ethan stammered, unable to find an answer. Nearby, some employees exchanged glances, a few even shook their heads. They knew Ethan had no way out of this. Elijah took a deep breath and stepped closer. His voice was low but carried undeniable authority. The problem isn't how you treat people after you find out who they are. The problem is that, from the start, you decided who deserves respect and who doesn't, based solely on appearances. Ethan swallowed hard. Every word felt like a sharp blade slicing through his already crumbling confidence. Up until now, Daniel had remained quiet, but now, he finally spoke. You know, Ethan, This isn't the first time I've been judged because of my clothes. And I know I'm not the only one. A murmur spread through the showroom. A few customers exchanged knowing looks. One woman turned to her husband and whispered, "Do we really want to buy from a place like this?" Ethan's stomach twisted. The situation was spiraling further out of his control. He desperately forced a smile. "Mr. Carter, we value our customers. If you and your father are still interested in purchasing a vehicle, I'd be more than happy to offer you an exclusive deal." Elijah chuckled, cold and humorless. "You think we need a deal?" Ethan fell silent. Elijah shook his head before turning to his father. "Dad, let's go. We can buy a car anywhere. But not from a place like this." Daniel gave a slight nod, a small smile forming on his lips. Ethan stood there, helpless, as he watched them step through the glass doors and disappear. He was just about to retreat into the showroom when a deep voice rang out behind him. "Ethan." His body stiffened. That voice. Slowly, he turned around to see Mr. Langford, the senior manager of the entire chain of luxury showrooms. His expression was unreadable, but his sharp eyes held nothing but disappointment. "My office." Now, the showroom fell into a deafening silence. Employees avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in their tasks. Ethan's heart plummeted. He knew his nightmare had only just begun. Ethan stepped into Mr. Langford's office, feeling a crushing weight settle on his chest. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing him off from the showroom, where employees and customers were undoubtedly still whispering about the scene that had just unfolded. Mr. Langford sat behind his polished oak desk, fingers interlocked, his piercing gaze dissecting Ethan like an insect under a microscope. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he let the silence stretch, allowing its suffocating pressure to settle over Ethan, squeezing out every ounce of confidence he had left. Finally, Mr. Langford broke the silence, his voice slow but filled with authority. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain composed. "Sir, I admit there was a bit of a misunderstanding. But I never intended." "Misunderstanding?" Mr. Langford arched an eyebrow, his eyes sharp as a blade. "Do you even realize who Elijah Carter is?" Ethan fell silent. Of course, he knew. Elijah Carter wasn't just a wealthy businessman, he was one of the showroom's biggest clients. A single complaint from him could force upper management to reconsider how this entire showroom operated. Mr. Langford's voice grew even firmer. "We didn't just lose a big client. We lost our reputation." Ethan's throat went dry. "Sir, I can call him, explain the situation, maybe offer him a special deal." "You think Elijah Carter needs a deal?" Mr. Langford cut him off, his disappointment unmistakable. "You think someone like him can be bought with a discount?" Ethan had no response. With a measured breath, Mr. Langford reached for his computer, turning the screen toward Ethan. "I just received an email from corporate. Do you want to know what it says?" Ethan hesitantly leaned forward. His eyes landed on a single line of text, just a few words, but enough to send ice through his veins. "Review Ethan Walker's employment status immediately." The ground beneath him seemed to shatter. His knees nearly buckled as he collapsed into the chair, gripping the armrests as if they were the only thing keeping him upright. "I gave you multiple chances," Mr. Langford continued, his tone now devoid of patience. "But you insisted on judging customers by their appearance. And now? You've cost us a multi-million-dollar deal because of your arrogance." Ethan opened his mouth, desperate to argue, but there was nothing left to say. "Pack your things," Mr. Langford said flatly, effective immediately. Ethan felt the world tilt beneath him. "Sir, please, if you could reconsider." "There's nothing to reconsider." Mr. Langford stood, signaling toward the door. "We need someone who respects our customers, not someone who discriminates against them." Ethan sat frozen, a cold sweat running down his spine. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet, his hands trembling. He stepped out of the office. And the moment he did, every pair of eyes in the showroom turned toward him. No one said a word. They didn't have to. He knew they had all heard. His career, his status, everything he had built over the years. Gone. And the worst part? He had no one to blame but himself. Daniel and Elijah stepped out of the showroom, leaving behind the storm that had just crashed down on Ethan. But for them, the matter wasn't entirely over. Elijah opened the car door for his father. But before getting in, Daniel slowly turned back, gazing at the showroom with a contemplative expression. "You know, Elijah," he said, his voice no longer carrying anger, only the calm wisdom of experience. "This isn't the first time I've met someone like Ethan. And it certainly won't be the last." Elijah tightened his grip on the steering wheel, nodding. "I know, but what frustrates me isn't just how he treated you. It's the way everyone else saw it happening, and didn't say a thing." Daniel let out a quiet chuckle, a knowing look in his eyes. "Son, that's how the world works. Most people choose silence. Only when something affects them directly do they finally speak up." Elijah took a deep breath. "But if no one is willing to change, then nothing ever will." Daniel patted his son's shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. "And that, Elijah, is exactly why people like you are needed in this world.